Hey, everybody. Welcome to Watches with Dennis. And this should be the last Watches with Dennis video of 2023. Granted, there's a whole 2 days left, including today. So not exactly a big reach there. But today, what we're going to do is go over some watch controversies. Now, I've broadly defined this. I did this as a pre-recorded video last year, but I thought it might be more engaging as a live stream this time around. And so the way I'm defining the concept of a controversy isn't necessarily that it's controversial to the watch collecting public at large, but rather that it could be that, or it could be some sort of scandal, or it could be negative for the company or brand that is impacted. So I've kept it a little loose. So, because one might not care necessarily about what's going on with Apple as a controversy to the public. I guess it depends if you're interested in the product or not. But I think we can all agree that it isn't a good thing for Apple. So I actually initially thought about doing this as sort of just top surprises of 2023. The problem with that is there were a lot of them, and there are a lot of positive ones, at least, again, by the same categorical definitions. So, like Rolex, I'm sure, sees it as a positive that they acquired Booker. I'm sure Breitling sees it, at least for the time being, as a positive that they purchased Universal Genève. So those would be examples of happenings in the watch industry, surprises that we weren't really expecting as hobbyists, but ended up manifesting during 2023. But instead of doing that, I'm just going to focus on negatives because they're far more interesting anyway. The first couple I'm going to tear through relatively quickly because we talked about them on the last live stream. So I don't think we'll spend a lot of time on them unless, of course, the live chat is interested in that. And then we are also 50% of this stuff is actually auction related. And I'll probably opine a little bit more about my thoughts on auctions as we move forward. But for the time being, it is what it is. So catch up wise, before we get going and going through formal introductions, wearing the Mosier Pioneer center seconds on my wrist today, which actually has a little speck of dust under the dial. So I thought I would try and get that out yesterday. Now, I don't normally worry about working on watches up to a price point, and then I worry a lot. So normally I don't take the back off of a watch if it's over $2,000. So, but I'd never noticed a little speck of dust before. And in fact, when I bought this is used, but when I bought it, they had noted it did get serviced because there was dust under the dial. Anyway, long story short, back is screwed down with little screws. No problem. Got the back off, and then it doesn't use a spacer. So it actually is screwed into the case. So I did not go any further because I was like, I'll do it up until the point where I might scratch the movement. So put it back. The screwdriver maybe slipped one time on the exterior of the case. So no big deal. Didn't get the dust piece out. And then I found out, I see why they missed it. It's like static for the hour hand keeps picking it up. So it hides under the hour hand, and then occasionally it sits on the dial. So it's not doing any damage, and it's not going to get to the movement. So when this finally needs service, I can tell them, hey, there's still dust under the dial to deal with, but it's running over 300 amplitude right now. So I don't think it's going to need service for a number of years. Normally, you can't even notice on these watches because the dome sapphires get so much dust on them constantly. I never would have noticed, except it showed up in a photo I took. And I zoomed in. I thought, is that a dot over? Because it was above the signature of the Moser company. And I was like, did they dot the I there? And I was like, no, it's this teeny little piece of white dust. But not my first dial that's had that happen. So anyway, just one of those fun watch collecting things. Now, in terms of the channel and fun things, well, fun's relative, but I did just after the last live stream later in the day, so a week ago, put out my 5 most worn watches video. That's actually done fairly well for me, a few thousand views, a couple thousand. So thank you everyone who went ahead and I'm looking. I've seen one of Coachy's comments, so I'll highlight it now so no everyone will be like, why is he laughing like a loon for no reason? Yes, the ultra rare dot over. It's just I normally dust I can't see, but the too well, especially without and I can't. It's hard for me to see this one without a loop, also, except the dial's so blue and the dust is white. So and that so is the signature. So yes, the ultra rare. See, it's a collector's piece. It's the ultimate collector's piece. Worst dial I ever had, incidentally, for dust was my first Zodiac, and that was new in box, and the distributor got me a new one, which wasn't perfect, but that dust was clinging to the underside of the sapphire. Again, static does a lot of that sort of stuff, but Anyway, I ended up letting that watch go mostly because of the first one I got. I was fine with the level of dust in this. Again, it was almost impossible to notice without having a loop. And I've tried to get to the point where if you can only see imperfections with a loop, you need to let it go, sort of thing. Not be too anal about it. But easier said than done when you're spending a lot of money. And that Zodiac was over 1,000, so I was like. Whereas like my Orient, it's got dust under the dial too. And it's just like, whatever. It was under $200. So, and it was a gift. But anyway, so top 5 watches that I wore. I'm actually going to try and do that more analytical. I had to just sort of estimate it, and I rotate quite a bit to try and wear many of my watches. So I think I'll just make a spreadsheet, totally nerd out, and track it moving forward, and then I might be able to do some graphs and stuff for 2024, because I don't usually change watches during the day, but I do sometimes. But it's usually one watch per day as a sort of generalized approach. So anyway, that is those are the updates before we move into this. So let me say hello to so many of you. Tuna, thank you for being here, and of course for being a 99-cent club member, which for those that are interested in that, link in the video description below. Likewise, link to the Discord if you want to chat about watches textually, share photos and stuff. I've got a little Discord channel. There's no cost to that. Anyone can participate who is interested in that. Happy New Year, Koji. Glad you could be here. Scott asks a question. Do you think Moser will make the Mad Red dial in the smaller 40 millimeter size? Eventually, yes, I do. I actually read that they have now discontinued the Mad Red. I don't know if that's true or not. Moser usually only does a short stint with most of their colored dials, so at least in the Pioneer line. So, but them doing it again in another smaller size, I would never write them off from doing that. I love the Mad Red. The only reason I actually ended up with the funky blue instead of the Mad Red was because I have a red Orient Cano, and I only really need one red dial watch, quite frankly. So, hey, GCM, welcome to the live stream. And Kevin, good morning to you as well. And Frank. So, all right, we got a crew here. We're ready to get cracking along with these topics. Oh, I've got banners for us this time, guys. I went all out for the end of the year. So there you go. You get a little ticker. So what are we going to start with? Well, obviously, as the ticker says, we're going to start with number 6. These aren't actually in much of an order. They're kind of. I've sort of ranked them in the order of priority to watch collectors that I think might watch this channel. So Apple's at the bottom because, well, I think a number of you may very well own a smartwatch. You're probably not into watch collecting because of smartwatches. So that's sort of the deal. So, and again, I have links to all of the articles I'm going to use in the video description. Now with the ticker, I have to sit higher to be above my. Here, let's see, my chair can go higher. My problem is I start banging into the keyboard rack if I get the chair too high. So, all right, there. Now you can kind of still see my face, so I don't look like this, and you just see my nose peeking over like Kilroy. Okay, so we'll go ahead and we'll start with this. Again, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this one because I talked about it on the last live stream. The recording of that is available if you want to go ahead and check it out. So there's been some movement since then. So when we talked about this last Saturday, it was at the very end of a period where the Biden administration would have been allowed to intervene to stop the trade decision, which was Apple could no longer import watches with their pulse oximeter technology because International, Trade Commission had determined that the pulse oximeter technology had been stolen from another company. Misamo, I believe is the name of it. And since then, the administration did not intervene, which was that as expected. The administration was not anticipated to intervene. The administration did intervene back when there was a conflict between Apple and Samsung, but that was less surprising because Samsung is not an American company and Apple is, but Misamo is an American company. So it's like an American company versus an American company. No one legitimately thought that the administration would pick sides in that, and they didn't. However, as you can see from this headline at CNN, Apple gets to sell them again because they did get a court to temporarily block the import ban. So now third parties were still selling these Apple Watches, and it impacts the the Series 9 and the Ultra. I don't really know Apple Watches very well. The Ultra 2 and the Series 9. So Apple does have some smartwatches that do not have the technology in them. Now, so what's going to happen moving forward with this? We don't know. Apple has got a date, I believe, with the court in early January, early to mid-January, where they will be presenting a solution to the claims. And they deny that they've stolen the technology. What they're arguing is that they're going to have a new way for their software to interpret the technology. And that's what they're going to argue to let them go ahead and get this entirely kind of dismissed and let them move forward. I as is the Misamo company, am skeptical because the trade issue, the patent infringement, is on hardware. So that they've got a different way for their software to use the hardware, I'm not sure is going to get them out of this. But that's the angle it sounds like they're going to run with. Assuming that doesn't work, and I'm going to assume it doesn't work, but what do I know? Then I imagine what they'll try and do, rather than come up with new hardware, is because they make so much money off of these watches, they will, Massimo, that's the name of the company, that they'll probably try and strike a deal with Massimo, which is a medical device maker and holds a number of patents, to try and alleviate, like give them a payment per watch or something and basically buy the rights to use the patent. Which, as I understand it, Massimo has a number of patents where they've done this. So Massimo read a little bit more detail, wasn't in the CNN article, but a little litigious. I don't know if I would go full on calling them a patent troll, because it does sound like they actually developed their patents themselves. But they're pretty defensive of it, and they have been in the process of trying to make their own smartwatch. So that's why they're probably extra on edge about this. But there was a fascinating piece in an article elsewhere, it might have been in Forbes, where they really explored how Apple hired a guy away from Massimo. He didn't invent the technology. However, he seemed to be very upset that he wasn't moving up as high as he wanted in the Massimo Corporation. So he went over to Apple, and then they all of a sudden had this pulse ox technology, and he was only there for a few months because he wanted to be able to have full hire and fire authority over his own team of engineers. And Apple was like, that is not how we do business. And he just rubbed everyone the wrong way. So he didn't even last a year. Yet mysteriously, technology that to many looks very, very similar to what Massimo was working on, all of a sudden is in Apple's hands. So that's where just a little bit of additional background. So very, very interesting story, I think. Relevance to us as collectors, minor, unless you've been thinking about getting a smartwatch. I know a lot of watch collectors who do wear smartwatches quite a bit. But I wanted to give you all an update on that. It's a big deal, even though it may not be the biggest deal to collectors, simply because we're talking about something on the order of a $17 billion industry for Apple, just on the watches. They make a fortune. They are the biggest watch manufacturer in the world at this point. And they make the most money on watches out of any company, more than Rolex. And so for those reasons, I think it's very relevant to us for our discussion purposes. So let me go ahead and catch up on chat here right quick. Yes, DNN, a reference to the ticker going on, my full-fledged fancy StreamYard technology. GCM asks, speaking of controversies, should I get a watch with an ETA 2824 or one with Powermatic? That comes down to mostly what you think, if you think anything on servicing. If you get a 2824, virtually any independent watchmaker is going to be able to have parts and actually do repairs. I do not know how ubiquitous the Powermatic is with independent watch collectors. However, if you were to send it back to, say, Swatch Group, then what they're going to do is they're just going to replace the entire movement. Now, for an inexpensive watch, I should just say me in general. It's just like with Moser even. Moser has pre-repaired balances. So when people send their watches back, they get a new balance. Well, a used balance, but they get another balance. It's not the same balance. To some people, though, they have this emotional attachment to watches where like the balance is the heart of the watch, and it really bugs them when parts are changed that aren't broken. Likewise, I've seen people, even though it's on the more affordable end of the spectrum, who are really bothered at the idea that if they ever send their Powermatic watch in for service, it won't be the same movement. They'll just put in a new movement. And it really bothers some people. If you are one of those people, I would get the ETA 2824. If you're not one of those people, then I would say, unless you care about like the beat rate, because the ETA is going to be at 4 hertz and the Powermatic is going to be at 3, but you're going to get a lot more power reserve out of the Powermatic. So from a functional standpoint and the accuracy with the way the laser alignment and stuff that they do with the Powermatic, I would say the Powermatic is the better movement. Like it's going to give you accurate timekeeping. It's going to give you more power reserve. So everything else being equal, it's probably a better movement to have, but not too surprising given how old the ETA is. But for repair purposes, and if you've got that emotional attachment to movements, the ETA is the safer pick. So that'd be my answer to that question. Good morning, Neff, and also thank you still for being a 99 Club member. And I see Neff is not a big fan of the 2824 and their Solita clones. Well, you know what a lot of people are a fan of and also not a fan of? The other topic that we talked about last week, which had to make the top 6 list of my controversies, and that has to be Rolex. Rolex being fined in France mostly because of the refusal to allow their authorized dealers to sell online. It's actually also mail order as well. But anyway, article in the video description. We don't need to go into a whole lot of details on this because we talked about it a lot last time, but it's a pretty big deal. I put it in as a controversy because from the Rolex's perspective, this is not good for a couple of reasons. One, even for a company as wealthy as Rolex, $100 million penalty is a big deal. That is a lot of money for a company just to shell out for ostensibly for making some mistakes, legal mistakes. Will it hold up? Are they going to challenge it? I have no idea. I would assume they will challenge it. But I don't know the rules of the French court system and what exactly they can do. I'm sure that they very much don't want to start allowing their authorized dealers to sell products online. That's been a long-running thing out of Rolex. But the solutions, assuming that they don't get the decision reversed, like on appeal, are, I think, fairly limited. I cannot fathom them honestly pulling out of the French market. It seems that's killing an ant with a shotgun sort of approach. They make a lot of sales there. And while those of us who are not in France might lick our lips at the notion that we might get more allocation if France was all of a sudden just not in the batch of countries that Rolex supplies. This like wait list, and well, we've already seen the wait list get shorter. I don't think most of us think that's going to last forever. It wasn't even 10 years ago where you could walk in and get discounts on certain Rolex models. In my opinion, those days are going to come back at some stage. Those days might not come back for the foreseeable future for the GMT Master 2. It had been a really long time ever since the Daytona got popular. They've never been easy to get ever since they got popular. There'll always be those. But some of this stuff, like the idea that you have to pay full price for a date just I think it's going to ultimately go away. And that's where the online sales thing starts to come into play. A lot of authorized dealers might not care too much about being able to sell online right now. It's in the future when these products don't all just move and games no longer make sense to be played for most people to get what they want. Most people who buy Rolex are not collectors. Most people who are buying Rolex are regular individuals buying milestone watches, buying the name, don't really know anything or care about what model they get. All that sort of stuff comes into play. Ultimately, I think the online sales helps almost everyone who's a consumer. I try to think, is there any potential negative impact outside of maybe to flippers or something? I'm not sure. I suppose those of you who maybe have been buying Rolexes as investments, which I'm not personally a fan of, but we all come at the hobby for different reasons. Maybe there would be a concern about the online sales because maybe Rolex didn't argue that the reason they don't allow online sales is because it cheapens the brand. But if that's why you think they don't, like, if you think they were lying about the whole counterfeit stuff and everything, which again, the French courts were like, Cartier has a counterfeit problem and they still allow online sales. So it doesn't make sense to us why Rolex is so special that it's different. But if the real reason was to protect the crown's reputation, then if it's no longer, oh yeah, if you're in New York, it's hard to get a Rolex, but it's easier to get a Rolex out in Mexico City or something. And then all of a sudden you can just go online and start buying the things you want. The hot pieces are going to remain hot, but maybe it diminishes the brand in people's eyes when there are not quite so many games that have to be played. Maybe it hurts investment value. Long term, I struggle with it. It comes down to quantity in the end. The bottlenecks I don't think there have been very many bottlenecks. Rolex is so present. It's ever present in almost every mid-size and above city. You can find a Rolex dealer. They're not hard to find. And so if you want your watch, if you want your GMT Master 2 to be worth a lot in the future, you just need them not to make very many of them. That's the secret to it. That's the Patek way. And so maybe it has a slight impact. Some people might be worried that Rolex will fall off of the top of the mountain. I don't think this causes that. That would really have to come down to either Rolex. Mostly, I think it has to come down to Rolex screwing up and tarnishing their brand image, which they've been very cautious not to do. So I think Rolex sits at the top of the heap for at least another generation. At some point, are they no longer the most beloved brand? Maybe. I mean, they definitely don't make the best watch, but they make a very good watch. And I'm still interested in Rolex watches. So it's, I don't think this ultimately does a lot to them other than maybe it shakes up their business model. Speaking of that, though, outside of pulling out of France, what, other scenarios, they become their own network of boutiques, they just bought Bucherer, but they rely on the third party. And that's also where I think we have to remember that not everything is just going to fly off the shelf like it was for a few years here. Rolex, I think, knows that. So ultimately, what happens if they've got their own boutique, they don't make money until the customer buys the watch. That's great in a hot market, but it's not great in a slow market. Rolex has like the best of both worlds. They get to be super bossy with their authorized dealers, and they just ship the authorized dealers watches. The authorized dealers don't even know what they're getting when the shipment comes. And the authorized dealer just has to buy all of it. They have to buy all of it. So they make money the moment the authorized dealer pays them. And then it's the authorized dealer who's stuck trying to sell all those lady Datejusts. Rolex already made their money. Their hands are clean. They got their money and they're done. That doesn't work in a boutique model. If Rolex goes first party on all their sales to ensure that there's no online sales, I think it actually hurts them more, because I think Rolex is extremely reliant on the cash flow of making their ADs buy everything up front. And that's why that model is so attractive. We see it in pinball. Many of the larger manufacturers, all the larger manufacturers, use distributors. Some of them sell direct a little bit because you make more money selling direct. However, by using distributors, the distributors have to buy the products the moment they're shipped. And then the distributor's stuck figuring out how to get a consumer to buy it. So I don't think Rolex walks away from that. It just doesn't seem realistic to me. Catching up on the chat, GCM says, thanks for the answer, Dennis. I was thinking between the Tissot Gentleman Silicom Powermatic powered versus the Tissot 1938 Heritage. I need to look. For me, it would come down more to the design of the watch. And I don't remember what the 1938 looks like. The Gentleman is a very attractive watch. I don't know much on it. Tuna says that he thinks the 1938 looks well. So that would maybe be his pick. Scott says, ironic, because for some fashion brands that are French-based, they don't allow online sales, Goyard being one of them. Yes, and there are, I believe, other watch brands that have rules about online sales. The question is, are they selling third-party? And, maybe these things get enforced on others. Maybe this is a crackdown. It's interesting because it's all in the terms of the contract. So that's where I was a little surprised at Rolex being fined, because this was an agreement that the authorized dealers did sign on to. Whether an entity wants to come in and say, this is too anti-capitalist, you're infringing too much on the free market by telling third parties how to sell their products. I understand that argument. And I agree with that argument. But I was a little surprised at the $100 million fine, because it's like, well, in theory, I hate to use another pinball example, but allow me to. There's one big player in pinball. It's called Stern Pinball. They're over most likely 80% of the market. I don't know if an authorized dealer could be a full-time authorized dealer selling all the other pinball manufacturers and make them enough money to survive with a family. They can with just Stern. So if Stern were to do these sort of techniques on people about salesmanship, and if you were to lose your Stern distributorship, could you still actually be a full-time distributor? I think the answer is no. I don't think you could. But With watches, it's not the same. Yeah, Rolex is the crown. It's on the jewel, at the top of the Swiss market. But there are plenty of jewelers. Most jewelers that are AEDs are selling more than watches anyway. But there are plenty of other watches that will make you enough money that you could, in theory, survive without Rolex. I mean, we have an area dealer that is not the Rolex dealer. They've got Breitling, they've got Omega, they've got plenty of stuff that they make money off of. So I'm not sure it was as dire as maybe the French interpreted it as, but I don't know. And yes, that the humorous concern of, again, Rolex has not argued it's cheapening the brand. I've seen fans argue it, but I've not seen this come up from Rolex. So that's not been the defense that they've had. Let's see. So a little discussion about that movement stuff. Scott mentioning Joe at Pinball Star is not a Stern distributor. Does he sell anything besides pinball, though? I don't know. I haven't gone to the Pinball Star website in years. So I am not sure. All right. So let us hop over to the number 4 watch controversy of the year. It had to be on the list somewhere, guys, right? So Anthony Ferrer with the Timepiece Gentleman. So I did a standalone, no, not a standalone video. Yeah, I did one going over the lawsuit. I don't have a link in the description, but I have a link to the CNN article because, hey, he finally got all the fame I think he was after. Maybe infamy, though. Well, definitely infamy versus fame. So maybe not the sort of attention he wanted. And we talked a bit about when the admission of the misappropriation of funds video had come out. And I did a live stream. I remember because I think we had a couple of fans of his I don't have fans, but fans of his in the audience. Because I remember someone arguing something about how they thought it was nice to be able to go to a sale, like someone driving a Lamborghini selling something because they're successful. And I really struggled to wrap my brain around the entire notion, because I have never once contemplated that a salesperson needs to be rich for me to think they're a good salesperson. It's like, your job is to sell stuff. I'm concerned with honesty, integrity, guarantee of the product, knowing what I can do if I have a serious concern with it. Never once have I gone in and asked myself, I wonder what that person drives. I sure hope that they're a big shot. It's sales. It's not exactly the most sophisticated field. No offense to say, I know, and I'm friends with a lot of people who are salesmen. But it's a very, very common job position all over for a reason. And we don't demand all of them drive Ferraris. So this whole thing, absolutely fascinating. Again, the article will go through a lot of the breakdown on this, but the reason why this one is in the middle of the pack here on my list is because Timepiece Gentleman wasn't just a quote unquote gray market watch dealer. They were a big YouTube channel. In fact, I don't know if they were the first or not, but to many, they were the first that popularized what I demeaningly refer to as the backpack slinger. So this became super hot in the pandemic. We saw all sorts of YouTube channels start up where people are wheeling and dealing, and you're watching the day in the life of a watch dealer, and they're in their fancy cars going out to their fancy steak dinners with their fancy watches. And then you're trying to, if you're me, you're sitting there, mostly not watching the videos because I didn't really find that content very interesting. I don't enjoy watching people sell stuff. There's a reason why I'm not a salesperson. I do not find it interesting work. But a lot of people did. They love to watch the grind, especially the notion of like that if you do this, you can be. I was a bank teller when I was in high school, and there was never this expectation. Bank tellers don't make a lot of money. Hence why high school students do it. But there was never this expectation like that because you handle tens of thousands, or I even had days where my drawer would be over $100,000 in cash. There was no expectation that I should then be driving a luxury vehicle. Like me handling big dollar stuff in that case, big dollars did not mean that I was rich. And likewise, the notion that just because you are slinging luxury products to rich people does not mean that you are rich. Yet somehow Anthony and then this whole slew of ilk after him started showing these videos where they're not just selling to big shots. This has thus made them big shots. And to me, intellectually, it never made very much sense, especially as we learned many, actually all of them that I can think of that had these style videos were consignment dealers. So they didn't even have the currency to bring in the watches. And you're hearing that they're doing consignments for, I think in Anthony's case, the average was a 5% profit. How do you go out to $100 meals every day? How do you afford leasing Ducatis and Lamborghinis on 5% when you know most of the watches you sell are not iced out APs and 5711s? They're Rolexes. So you're making a few $100s per Rolex. And you have expenses, right? Right? You have expenses. You have taxes. Yeah. Anyway, so for those that haven't looked into any of that and haven't read the article or don't want to read the article, long story short, in the case of Anthony, got out in front of his skis, might be the expression you would say, started doing the consignment thing. And then as the market turned south, in particular, he was not giving the consignment money back to, allegedly, to the people who had consigned the watches with him. So he was supposed to keep 5% and then send the money back. Instead, he used the money from the watch sales to fund his extravagant, luxurious lifestyle, and thus the debt just piled up. And as you saw at in the article at the top, roughly $3 million in terms of what is alleged to have been scammed out of people through various wire and mail fraud tactics, where at the end he started shuffling watches around, like sending a used watch that someone consigned to him as payment to someone else who he should have sent the money to, but he already spent the money on himself, and lying about what was going on. And then he had video. I mean, he's admitted to this in videos. It was the most ridiculous, incompetent thing I can't say I've ever seen, but it was weird. But the whole thing was always weird to me. He got on my radar back when they did the blackout in Dallas. It's still my most successful long form video, with like over 45,000 views, was me giving a nonprofit interpretation because they said they did the blackout for charity. And it was ridiculous. There were red flags before that for those, I think, that were following him, because he had a Facebook group where they were selling memberships to then offer watches to those members at wholesale to try and it's like $2,000 to join the club. I mean, all this sort of really scammy stuff. And I don't know, I feel like putting on my get off my lawn old guy overalls and saying, I don't know what's with, like, if this is a millennial thing or what, where there's this like worship of the grind. It's not a grind. This is people trying to find easy money. And so you look at stupid jobs like be backpack flipper, and people lend you their watch and you get 5% for finding someone to spend money on it. I mean, I guess it's a business, but it's definitely not a business that we need to exist at this point, especially when you think about that there are established secondhand dealers, brick and mortar dealers. That's where, like Watch You Seek and Watchbox and David SW was probably the first one I knew about, where it's like that do this secondhand thing. And there was all this buy and sell trade stuff. Why it's number 4 on my list isn't just that this was such a big deal in the YouTube space because he was seen as an entertainer to a lot of folks. This begs the question about so many other of these entities out there doing this stick. And there's this whole sub-click of wristwatch YouTube that is this type of people. It's interacting with each other. And I've always found it a little scummy and very suspect, but it got eyeballs during the pandemic. Those viewership levels, I'm sure, have dried up quite a bit just in the wake of people aren't in lockdown anymore. We're past our Tiger King era, folks. But some of these entities are still limping along. I still read about other ones with, purported robberies, but they can't get insurance to pay out. And it was all consignment and they owe people money. And more people lumbering in and out of their ultra luxury leased sports cars, and you're like, you're a salesman. Why are you in this thing? You're not a car salesman. You're not a luxury car salesman. So I don't get it. Why are you blowing so much money on this and not growing your business? But I guess when you don't even need money to get the watches, it's real easy. I think this said a lot about consignment. And so if there's a silver lining out of any of this, other than getting fraudsters off the street. Anthony's still in jail right now. Probably because he's likely identified as a flight risk. But given what we've seen, I think a lot of people are going to be a lot more suspect about using the consignment model to move a watch. And the attraction's always been, hey, if I do the consignment, I'm going to make more money than if you go to like a watch box or a David SW to sell or trade your watch. You're not going to get as much as you could sell it directly for. And the consignment was sort of seen as a happy middle ground where, yeah, you make less money, like that 5% less, but you make more than trading it in or selling it to David SW. And you avoid the trouble of going on Chrono 24 and selling it yourself. But obviously, there are just these huge risks. There are all these upstarts. They don't have insurance, or their insurance isn't properly structured. They don't protect the watches. They wear them. They flaunt them. And then you have things like this where people pull a runner and sell stuff and then keep all the money. And then what's your recourse? Because they're states away, and you turn to them because you trusted them because they wrote a Ducati on YouTube. I've never mentally understood this sort of attraction and why people get seduced by this. But I guess it's the same reason people fall for demagogues. I don't get it, but a certain mindset just laps that crap up. So anyway, this ultimately I think was a big positive for the hobby to finally see this, because TPG was red flag after red flag, and I never understood anyone defending it, because you have to really have fallen for the secret sauce to think any of that was good. But catching up on chat, back on our prior one, talking about Rolex, Neff had noted that feels their antics cheapen the brand. Scott notes, or making 100,000 pieces a month. Being flashy typically isn't a good thing for salespeople. It turns many people off. I think I see it both ways. I think most of the time you just don't, like, when you walk into the car dealer, I mean, last time I walked in the car dealership, I didn't know what the salesperson drove. I'm in the place and we're making the deal on the car that I wanted. I don't know anything about their personal life, and I don't care. Well, one of them was a friend of mine, so I knew about his personal life because he was a former housemate of mine. But I didn't know what he drove, and knowing wouldn't have necessarily made me think he was any better or worse of a salesperson. If he had a really nice car, I would have just thought he was a car guy, sort of thing. Like, I drive a Corolla. People look at it and they probably go, "Oh, he's not a car guy," if they think anything. Whereas if they know about watches, they probably go, "Okay, yeah, he's into watches and not into cars," because that's how it is for me. So just one of those things. Tuna noted TPG had grifter written all over him. I agree. I thought it was glaring from the get-go. They were I never really consumed a lot. I probably saw 2 of his videos, but I've seen clips. Like Reddit's got a whole thing where there are lots and lots of clips. And there was always just this, it was just, it's mean. I don't want to be mean, but I'm going to be a little mean. This is really, really just stupid ideas, stupid on the surface of them. And that anyone thought they were good, that he thought they were good. But like talking about there was a whole penthouse saga, paid this exorbitant rent to get a penthouse. And the idea was they were going to live there. Like the salespeople were going to live at the penthouse, but the penthouse was also going to be a place to bring people in to sell stuff. And they were going to have a bar where they'd know their client's favorite color, and they'd make them an alcoholic drink in the color that's their favorite color. And I'm like, who cares about any of that crap? I mean, I've heard about people liking the AD experience where they go and get like a glass of champagne because they bought a Rolex or whatever, which I always thought was goofy, but I mean, come on, who wants to go and get oh gosh, I sure hope they make a pina colada because white dials are my favorite. What is that? It doesn't make any sense to me. It's weird, guys. All of it was weird. Just stupid wastes of money. Having the storefront on Rodeo Drive Boulevard. I like the CNN article says about I will note that one. had a storefront on the city's fabled Rodeo Drive. No, he did not. That is not accurate. That it was on Rodeo Drive, but it was like, it's not the Rodeo Drive you think of, like when every time you watch Beverly Hills Cop and see him driving down this Rodeo Drive. It wasn't that. It was like a side street connection, which Reddit had sniffed out that wasn't the case. So just one of those things. Neff notes, watching these guys slinging these prestigious brands cheapened them. I can't think AP now without thinking of these backpack dealers. Well, it's not for me. It's not AP. I know this breaks some of your heart. For me, it's Gerard Perigo. I won't shop Gerard Perigo at all, and because of TPG trying to make it a thing. So to me, all it is a knockoff AP brand, because they try to say it's going to be the new hot thing. It's going to be the next Patek, and it's like, I don't know what Gerard Perigo is, but whatever it is, if this guy's pushing it, it's trash. And I wrote him off. I never look at their watches, and I've seen a few, and actually a number of them. I'm not a big Laureato fan anyway, because I do think it's a little too cloney, but they actually, I have seen obviously when I scroll Chrono 24 or whatever, I've seen a few that I saw they were GPs, and I thought, oh, those actually look pretty good, but I don't care. I don't think I'll ever own a GP. Maybe I'll get past it eventually, but yep, that brand just became trash to me because I saw trash dealing it. And Neff says he found my channel from that blackout. Well, thank you for sticking around. I've tried not to do too many things on TPG because I never wanted to be that style of content. We have a content creator like that in pinball, and I just steer clear of things that just orient around really, really toxic things. But dramatic stuff is interesting and does need to be talked about sometimes, or else, you don't want to end up burying your head in the sand, so to speak. Koji writes, it's like when people brag about playing in Carnegie Hall, or is it Carnegie? Back when I lived in Syracuse, they always called it Carnegie. So they don't play in the real one. Ha 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 ha. Okay, I don't know about Carnegie Hall analogies other than it always makes me think of that Last Action Hero movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, because they use that as like a secret code phrase. Koji thinks that vintage Gerard Perigo is quite nice. And Neff says it was a good brand before these guys set their sights on them and they made some amazing dress watches. And they're independent now from the Kering Group. So, they might find their mojo again. That's why it's not fair of me to write them off. But I have to acknowledge that there's a taint to that brand now, and it's not the brand's fault, which is the saddest thing of all. And Scott compares the pinball reference to a similar personality to TPG. I don't know enough about on the pinball side to know, other than the narcissism stuff was known even back when I listened. So yeah, that's us. I mean, we see that personality in all sorts of hobbies, because that personality is actually pretty ever present in our lives in general. You know what isn't present in all of our lives? Omega. I have an Omega. I don't have the highest, most expensive, most prestigious Omega ever to be auctioned in my collection. But you know what? That's probably for the best, because item number 3, the rest of these are all going to be auction things, was this. Now, this auction actually happened back in 2021, but this news broke this year. That's why it's so relevant. This is back during the summer, I believe. But this prestigious, just amazing example of this vintage Omega Speedmaster turned out to be a cobbled together Frankenwatch, and not just any cobbled together Frankenwatch, a Frankenwatch cobbled together by someone who had worked for Omega and was deeply familiar with their vintage catalog. And the buyer of the watch was Omega to put in their own museum. This was not a very, I'd say this was a really loud scandal, but for a very short period of time, because it so didn't impact the everyday collector. But it speaks to what I think is a trend that we're starting to see, especially this year. We just got off of talking about grifters and backpack slingers. I think there is a similar thing to be said about these auctions, these watch auctions. And I think they are deeply suspicious and most likely, I'm going to allege, filled with fraud. And there's nothing, that scuzzy feeling I get with the backpack slinger, I get with the auction as well. It's just people seem to be in tuxedos when they're doing it. And more people seem to pander to it as like a respectable industry. And I've not seen anything respectable about anything coming out of the auction houses, period. But lately, I think there's been a lot of media play coming up on these sort of weird shenanigans. So $3.4 million sale for that Omega. So Omega bought it. There was a big sort of expose on Periscope, I think it was, tearing into what was wrong with the watch, including finding the prior sale of the watch where there were key indicators, key stains and stuff that people were able to identify and say, this is the same watch. Why does it look so different now? And then the dominoes all just started to fall, and there was admissions of guilt. But there was so much that this raised questions about, not just like that Omega fell for it. Kind of like, okay, so Omega doesn't even know if their own stuff's being Frankenwatched. I could almost forgive that to a degree because not every company has super extensive vintage cataloging. I mean, like Patek Philippe, it was only in the 30s, I think, that they introduced the first watch, I believe, ever that had a reference number. So you go back far enough and it gets tough. But that they fell for it, that they spent so much money on a fake, that the auction house did nothing to verify its authenticity. And that was, to me, the big thing to take away out of this one. Not so much that, I mean, there was a deliberate fraud that was perpetrated on Omega. So I think because it was so deliberate, there's a certain amount of maybe grace, we'll say. There's a certain amount of grace perhaps we should give Omega in terms of falling for it. But I think the important thing to collectors, especially those of you who are interested in auctions or have been interested in pieces that are so long discontinued that auctions are often your only way of obtaining them, and asking yourself, what does the auction house actually know? Because it seems to me that they don't seem to know much of anything, and they don't seem to have any culpability, or they feel they're at least devoid of responsibility to guarantee much else beyond that the sale is going to happen, you're going to get the product. Maybe, because we're going to dive into that one next. But this one was just, I just thought it was so weird. And it showed, I mean, it was a big auction. It was Phillips. I mean, a respected, I don't respect any auction house, but a purportedly respectable auction house. And it was all part of their Geneva Watch Auction, 14. And the auction house didn't identify the seller because of client confidentiality rules. But I mean, I'm assuming they did note, Phillips did note that if legal authorities asked for it, it would be identified. So ultimately, I think this one had a quote unquote happy resolution, but it raised a lot of interesting questions to me about just what are we allowing with, I mean, we're talking millions of dollars at this per watch, just ridiculous sums of money. And for such easy manipulation to apparently, I mean, the only thing sophisticated about any of this was that the person who made the forgery, well, Frankenwatch, I shouldn't call it a forgery, but made the Frankenwatch was deeply, deeply familiar from having worked at Omega with the back catalog. So they were able to exploit a lot of, but again, it was an amateur hobbyist enthusiast who identified quite easily that this stunk, because all these photos that they used were publicly available and that they sussed it out. I mean, there was a lot of egg on Omega's face for that reason. I mean, we might forgive them falling for it, but that an amateur caught the issue, I thought was deeply embarrassing for what is the third most successful Swiss watch seller at this stage, and with such a storied history too. But Scott says, I'm a novice compared to many of you in chat, but fraud seems to be rampant in many of these auctions. Again, and that's where we're gonna go into this a little bit more. But I think a big issue with these auctions is they don't guarantee anything. So there's this veneer of sophistication. They've been around for so long. You know, they've got the pulse on the values. You know, people look to these watch auctions for all sorts of like valuation guidance. In fact, there's one podcast I do subscribe to. I think it's called Significant Watches. And they talk about the auction stuff all the time. I listen because it is interesting, even though I also am fairly disgusted by the almost reverence they show it. But like that's what they're all about. It's just like, oh yeah, no, this is moving. Oh, the watch sales were a little, the auctions were a little soft. It was very concerning. And I'm like, no, it's not. Let it fall. Let it all fall. Let it crumble into dust. I don't want these prices to go up. Those of you buying this stuff for investment can get burned for all I care. That's not why I'm a collector. Some of you may be. more power to you. I am not cheering on the watches becoming more and more valuable, except, of course, all the watches I own. Because, of course, there has to be a level of hypocrisy to anything that we do. But Neff says, I remember when I first got into watches, people warned me not to buy vintage Omega because of Franken watches. Interesting that it goes right to the top. Yes. Oris is another brand that I've heard a lot of either fakes or Frankens online. Like, I just don't trust Oris outside of solid secondhand dealers or gray market. My Oris I bought through Bob's Watches, and it came with a warranty and everything, which I activated through Oris. Because I've seen a lot of really attractive, but I also know someone who bought an Oris off of eBay and then it turned out to be fake. And they did get I do think they got their money back, but because the seller didn't know, but it's unfortunate. You gotta be careful. And Frankened old watches is always a risk. I steer clear of vintage by and large in general, in no small part because I'm way too ignorant about vintage to be able to vet it myself. And since I know the limits of my own ability, I would rather stick with more modern pieces. Though at this point, I guess 90s is technically vintage, and I would be willing to consider 90s watches. But Tuna notes there are plenty of dodgy looking vintage Omega on eBay. But also says, but there is the Omega Museum. All the previous models are recorded. And that's, again, they bought the watch for the museum. That was what was so weird. GCM says, Oris, really? I'd love to get an Oris Aquis one day. For Oris, I love, if you're in the, well, I probably don't have to be in the US, but I would always recommend starting with Joma Shop as a gray market dealer because Orises tend to hit the gray market pretty readily. So if you want an unworn but real one, I would look there first, if you don't have a dealer nearby in particular. But otherwise, I think a lot of the stuff now that comes with box and paper. I mean, you always get box and papers and feel better about it. If you're going through a regular secondhand source like David SW, I don't know if David SW deals in Oris, but like Watchbox does. Like I would never have any qualms about buying through them, even if it didn't have papers. It's more just a really, like, again, older Oris that have shown up on eBay where I think and as a viewer of the channel got burned on one of those, but I'd heard a few instances of it. So I don't know why, because you wouldn't think Oris is a big enough company to warrant fakery, but I mean, there's fakery all over. I've seen faked Longa ones. Now, they were terrible because once you flip them over on the back, they couldn't fake the finishing of the movement. But not to mention they don't have the movements that look remotely like what would actually be needed. But Omega, of course, has got super clones and stuff. But yeah, very, 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 very interesting. But Oris is a fun brand, so I do recommend them. Neff says, I got my Aquis from Joma Shop. Love this watch. So yeah, I definitely recommend looking at it. They have usually really good selection there. So but yeah, I really like Oris as a brand. What else do I like as a brand? I like all sorts of brands. I don't have a good transition. Sorry, I was jumping to the next ticker. We got another auction that we need to jump into, and that is a Christie's auction. Now, this was more recent. Okay, now I don't think we talked at all about this one ever. So, nutshell summary: Christie's had an auction called Passion for Time. That the whole auction ended up being this weird mess. So they were getting ready to start the auction, and then the auction didn't start on time. And all of a sudden they found this third-party guaranteed buyer to buy lots that weren't going to sell. So every lot became, this is kind of the summary part of it here. It was a single owner. Their collection was this Passion for Time sale. So they found a guaranteed buyer to buy anything that did not reach the pre-agreed price during the sale. The third-party buyer would win the lot. Okay, that happens in auctions. However, because they hammered this out, and they were hammering this out so late in the day with the owner of the watches that the auction started an hour late. But they ended up revising up every single block. So everyone who went in there and knew what the starting prices were was betrayed because the starting prices were all higher than what they were told and what was published. That auction ends up happening, finishing. Everyone's kind of like WTF regarding all of that. And then what ends up happening is the collector who owned the sale, Mohammed Zaman, ends up filing civil suit against Christie's because something about this he still didn't like, even though he agreed to the whole thing with the third-party buyer. Now, the article that's linked in the video description that I'm showing here from Hodinkee does indicate that a settlement was reached regarding that. The reason why the lawsuit was noteworthy is while that civil suit was pending, Christie's couldn't send the watches to anyone who actually still the third-party guarantor or anyone who still decided to bid and buy and went and won a watch. They were all impounded and we're just sitting there waiting for this to be resolved. The whole thing was a ridiculous joke, starting with that, as I recall from the earlier articles before the lawsuit was filed, due to a fear that this watch sale was not going to look good, it wasn't going to post the big numbers that these auctions are like, we got to have our big numbers. So they ended up scrambling to find this third-party buyer. I heard they couldn't get the owner on the phone. This is all alleged, that he was asleep and they had to wake him up to get him to agree and sign this agreement with the third-party guarantor. And then to have anyone who actually chose to show up to this thing in Geneva excited about some of these watches, and then all of a sudden have these like new reserve prices just sprung on them. Total amateur hour joke. And it is my personal selfish hope that Christie's gets severely burned moving forward with a lack of trust and a lack of interest. Just given, it's just another, to me, the reason why it's here was it was just another example of gamesmanship that the auction houses play, where it almost seems like their purported prestige as an auction house and the concern, like, to manipulate why not just let the auctions happen? If the watches don't go for what people think they go for, then all right, the watch market's cooled off. So what? But no, it's all about trying to post bigger numbers, and it's all about obfuscation, smoke, and mirrors to make it look like that's the case. The reason why this is my number 2 above the Franken Omega is the Franken Omega only burned Omega because that's who bought it. This ended up costing everyone who went there, and then the prices were too high, wasted their time going to the auction. So you just wasted a whole bunch of rich people's time, which I'm sure they loved. Then everyone who actually bought a watch ended up getting screwed and having to wait because of this dumb lawsuit with the owner who was upset about what happened with an agreement he ended up signing and making the whole thing late. So even if you ended up wanting to and still being interested in the auction, your whole time was wasted yet again, because they ended up doing this 11th hour deal, which everyone's looking at. Even these people who worship at the altar of auctions was like, this doesn't look good for Christie's. Like, yeah, no, duh. It doesn't look good. It looks corrupt. And so that is why it's on the list. Catching up on chat. GCM says, I see. Either an Aquas GMT or a Longines Hydro Conquest GMT is what I'd like to get. I really like the Aquas designs a lot. I have a Pro Pilot, but aesthetically, there's the Aquas line I like over the Hydro Conquest personally, but that's just me. Let's see. Koji calls it passion for profit, an auction by Frankie Damon Christie. Well, you know, the 45th rule of acquisition is probably why do something for what you agreed to when you can change the terms at will? I'm sure that's one of them. Neff says, someone should ask John Reardon what he thinks of this. He used to run watch auction for Christie's. Awesome guy. Yeah, someone probably has asked, but if they have, I haven't heard. I don't know. It gives me the good old scuzzy feelings. And, you know, what I'm going to end with is, of course, I think if you've noticed, and I've told you, everything is about auctions as of number 3. What else would be number 1 other than Only Watch? It has to be Only Watch. This easily is the controversy of 2023 because people love Only Watch, even though they have no intention of ever buying anything from Only Watch, because Only Watch lets us see really cool watches. Right? So technically it's postponed. Is it really postponed or is it canceled forever? I don't know, but it definitely was canceled for this year. So that was a pretty big deal. Nutshell summary. Every 2 years, so every other year, there's supposed to be this Only Watch. It's a charity auction watch brands donate a one-off, one-of-one version of a watch to great fanfare, lots of attention to the images and stuff. It's interesting to collectors, not just because of the preciousness of those that of trying to get the one for those that have the means to do it, but a lot of times, whatever the one of one is, often informs a watch line that or a design that's about to come out. So you might see it in a different color or maybe a different case material or something like that. But some watch companies have used Only Watch to show off a watch, and then a similar style watch ends up coming out later. So people who can't afford an Only watch get really excited because they see these really weird or cool concept watches that come out because they're kind of like concept watches. So like this, I mean, and some of them, again, while you can't afford the Only Watch version, you can end up getting whatever, iterative thing comes out, because a lot of these are not, they're not all like the highest end brand. So you see like Tudor had an Only Watch, or where there was this Gerald Genta designed watch. Oris, I think, does an Only Watch. Regepi did one. Of course, he's really, really high end. But you've got all these different brands that end up coming up with all these watches. And I kind of wish I was showing you a picture of all the Only Watches. But this thing fell apart pretty rapidly. I remember FP Journe ended up having a statement defending the auction, but what ended up happening is Patek pulled out. And that, of course, is a big deal because the Patek watches are usually the bulk of the money that's raised because it's Patek Philippe. But long story short, what ended up happening is people started asking questions about, this is money being raised for charity. Who's getting the money? Like, they never show us anything. And so they put out some report information going up through, not the most recent years, but a long way through their timeline of existence. And most of the money they were giving to was given to another company, and people who are on the Only Watch like nonprofit board for the charity, some of them were on the board of the organization that ended up getting the grants from the charity. So it's like, okay, so you're raising charity money and then you're paying your for-profit research company to do research in the company on paper does research in the field, but it's like, but are these charity funds basically going and helping line the pockets of these board of directors of this for-profit company that oh so conveniently exists in the space that the charity raises money for? I don't think anyone's really questioning the formation of the cause. I don't remember which charitable cause it is, but I believe one of the founding individuals lost a child to the illness. So it's not that it's all like a fake charity scam, so to speak. But the concern that people have had is, are these people in their nonprofit capacity sending the money and paying themselves in their for-profit capacity? Very, very suspicious sort of thing. But because of this and the continued blowback and the loss of Patek being like, Patek, I don't think ever revealed what their Only Watch was going to be for Only Watch. But with Patek saying we're not going to provide a watch under this environment, the whole thing collapsed. And so Only Watch, the charity, is in the process of having an audit done, and then their hope is the audit's going to satisfy everyone, and then they'll move forward with the auction in 2024. And we'll see. But actually, I need to make a correction. Patek never revealed their watch. We don't know for sure they pulled out from it. Audemars Piguet pulled out. So Audemars Piguet, and you saw the picture of the watch. This was their watch for Only Watch. They actually announced that they weren't going to send it in for Only Watch. So Patek had still refused to reveal what their plan was. And so the thought was that Patek spooked them big time, but losing AP was bad. Losing Patek would have been devastating. Patek's watches, I believe, earn over 50% of the total gavel price comes out of just the Patek watch. And you think about all these other brands that end up being involved in Only Watch. So that's it's Patek. It's a really big deal. So yeah, it was a shocking turn of events. So let me go ahead and catch up on the chat here. Let's see. GCM says, what's Only Watch? I've heard of OnlyFans, but Only Watch. Yes. Only Watch I wanted to go ahead and throw up. I was hoping Hodinkee had a link, and they do. So I want to actually show you some of the stuff because it's pretty. Actually, the watches themselves are, again, sketchy auction. Are we really surprised at this point, folks? But there were some really cool, weird things. Here are just 12 of them that were revealed for this now postponed only watch. So this gold Tudor that follows the big block chronograph format. So not the more traditional 3, 6, 9 subdial, but the one with the subdial at 3, 6, and 12. So that was one of them. You saw that in the prior piece. We talked about the Audemars Piguet. I'm not into skeletonized style, but this was their open work flying tourbillon that they did. So that was kind of neat. FP Journe had this tantalum metal cased version of their cordon bleu or I guess cordon bleu is a food, I think. Chronome bleu. Sorry, my French just gets all mixed up. Which again, with the Journe finishing and stuff. This one got a ton of discussion at the time before the auction was postponed. This was the Bulgari's Octo Finissimo tourbillon with the case plated in marble. So that one turned a lot of heads when it was, and they actually turned out a watch that has kind of an aesthetic like this in the wake of it, because again, this was one of those instances where here is a watch and they actually were planning to have a mainline watch available, kind of similar in concept to this, but the watch is titanium and then they have a 0.5 millimeter layer of marble attached to it. Very, very cool concept. I don't know who did this chiming watch, but Biver, the Biver tourbillon, that one never really caught my eye. The Genta brand has been back. There was a Superlative podcast interview about it from a few months ago. But so there was a Mickey Mouse birthday cake one-off Gerald Genta watch. If you're really into those jump hour or jump minute, in this case, no, it's a jump hour with the Mickey hand that goes partially around the dial format. There was a really cool one there. Yeah, this Mosier, this is a Mosier collab, if I remember. Yeah, so it's the Mosier Streamliner, but they partnered with MB&F. Oh, people love this. Was super dorky, but people love this. So it's a minute repeater, but they have a DJ Panda to rock out on his turntable on the chimes. So you have the Mosier Streamliner case aesthetic with these weird dial configuration choices that are very MB&F. So it really looked like a true mashup between the Streamliner and something MB&F would have come up with. So that one got a ton of attention. I love Redzepi designs. Way too expensive for me. But this was very much in the spirit of some stuff like his first watch that he ever had come out. So he did a one-off for Only Watch. Ferdinand, I'm not really, I'm somewhat familiar with Ferdinand Berthun, but not really. But again, kind of an interesting, partially open cased watch that they did. And yeah, Baltic, I think had some, yeah. And this Baltic got a ton of attention too, where, it was an annual calendar Baltic with this frosted purple dial. So that's this, people love talking. I did a live stream on the Only Watch watches because the watches are cool, super cool. And on this auction, normally, it's not concerned about Franken watches and fake watches. These are new watches designed by existing brands, all over the price spectrum. So you see something like that Baltic and you go, okay, well, maybe we won't get the purple one, but maybe they'll do something like this as a mainline watch and I could get it. That's the sort of thing. It's really interesting. So. And Neff says, I hope Only Watch continues in some fashion. I always like seeing these one-of-ones and concept watches. Brands really went all in on them. Here's my theory. If Only Watch collapses, the desire from collectors and brands for the exposure and everything else makes me think a new charity would basically spring up and do it. Maybe one better organized, more transparent. A lot of the criticism about the Only Watch charity is that's organized, I think, in Monaco. I don't remember if it was Monaco or Morocco, one of the M places. But but they had notoriously lax nonprofit law, which just added to the drama. You organize like in the UK or the US, where there's a lot of transparency, like mandatory 990 reporting in the US on tax. You have to turn in tax returns. You have to announce where you're sending your funding to and stuff. I mean, I was at a nonprofit until earlier this year. And so, I was outsourced my 990, but like if I was a pass through for grants and stuff, I would have to have all that reported if they were like over $5,000 allotments, naming who was going to get them. But anyway, that is it for this episode. We have run long. I am done. I am done for 2023. I will plan to be back next Saturday, and we will start talking about 2024 stuff. We are only roughly 2 months out from the exciting time of Watches and Wonders, which is when we see the most new watches of the year and really have a lot of fun. Also, as a tidbit for those who have stayed all the way to the end, I said I would not get another dress watch in 2023. I have kept my word, but I made my purchase this week. I was a little worried that FedEx was saying it was going to arrive yesterday, and it did not. I do have a new dress watch coming. Should arrive either Tuesday or Thursday, or sometime between Tuesday and Thursday of 2024. So the cuffs are off. I no longer feel bound by my word. So I went ahead and took care of the purchase, figuring that it would take a while to get here. And then I was like, what do you mean Friday arrival? I guess I could choose not to open it, but now it looks like it's going to be okay. So anyway, I'll probably be able to reveal that on the next live stream. But until then, I hope you all have a really good weekend and a happy new year, and I will talk to you all soon. Take care.